All right, civil procedure. I know some of you are going to hate this subject, but I actually happen to like it. I got a B plus in that class in my first semester of law school, and that B plus was my highest grade in my first semester of law school, in my first year actually. So I think Civ Pro is quite straightforward. You just have to know some numbers. You just have to know some straightforward rules. It's a very mechanical subject where if you know the issues, you just gotta plug in the rules and then just plug in the facts and you're good to go. So I know Civ Pro can seem a little bit complicated. It seems like it has a lot of issues that play with each other, but I wanted to show you today an example of an issue that just seems to have a lot of moving parts, but it's actually quite straightforward. So once you see how it's broken down, once you see the issue skeleton, you'll kind of see a roadmap and kind of be able to see the shape of an essay. So I pulled this out from the California 2015 July exam, question number 1. So I'm going to go through the first two calls of the question. They deal with personal jurisdiction, and the outcome is different depending on who is the defendant. So I'll show you both versions. And before we do that, just wanted to give you a reminder. On the bar exam essay, people tell you to write like a lawyer, but what does that mean? You know, like lawyers write in different manners depending on the field, depending on the kind of writing that they do. But you know, typically it refers to like IRAC. You identify the issue, and then you see what kind of rule or principle applies, and then you kind of apply the facts, whether it's from the client or whatever the situation is, and then you have a recommendation at the end, typically. But you know, I prefer to call it write like a bar taker. So this is a more mechanical process. You're not writing for a corporation. You're not writing for a client. It is an objective look at the situation given to you. So in this case, usually the issues are the most important. And if you can organize the issues, then you are pretty much halfway home free. So don't write like a lawyer necessarily, write like a bar taker. So how the examiners want to see your essays, that's what matters. So in this case, the client is the bar grader. So do it like how your client wants to see it. In this case, you want to have clear issues, clear rules, and an IRAC structure that takes you through a logical sequence that resolves the questions in the essay. In general, in a Civ Pro essay, you want to, it's a good idea to know what's happening in which state, which parties are in which state. This helps us organize certain issues. In this case, personal jurisdiction, it does matter who's in which state. So let's figure out who's in which state. And by the way, this is described in the APRO sheets. Let's see, start with an organized table of states, parties and their actions, and the events given by the facts. So I did exactly that. I just set it up here. We have 4 different states in this case. Usually there aren't that many, but let's figure that out. Let's read the fact pattern and see who's doing what. So here we have doctor, we have patient, and we have valve code. We have 3 parties. So doctor implanted the valve in patient's heart in state A. So let's see here. Let's write that down. The implanted valve P in state A. So they both live in state A also. The valve was designed in state B by Valveco. Let's write that down. Valveco designed valve here in state B. Valveco was incorporated in state C and has its headquarters in state D. So Valveco is sort of all over the place, but let's see what happens. Patient was visiting state B and he collapsed due to his heart problems. The patient decided to remain in state B for medical treatment. So patient visited here and collapsed. And he or she is staying for treatment. And then patient sued the doctor and Valveco in state B, alleging that Valveco defectively designed the valve and doctor negligently implanted it. So we have 2 defendants. So let's write down P sued the doctor and Valveco under K. And then let's see. Doctor and Valveco moved to state court in state B to dismiss the case based on lack of personal jurisdiction. Write that down. So defendant moved, I guess they both moved, lack of PJ. And then here, the state court granted the motion for doctor and then denied Valveco's. Granted. So in Civ Pro questions, sometimes you have these like motions that get denied or granted. So what does that mean actually? So let's kind of translate this to a more easier way to look at it. So if the state court granted defendant's motion, this means that, so doctor is saying that there's no personal jurisdiction and the court agreed with that. So the question, the actual question is, was there personal jurisdiction for defendant over doctor? Court says no. So the question here is, we want to figure out whether there was personal jurisdiction over the defendant and whether that is whether there was a lack of personal jurisdiction. In which case, the court was correct, and if there was personal jurisdiction, then the court was incorrect. We'll do the same thing for Valveco. So the question here is kind of flipped on its head. So if the court is saying, if the court has denied the motion for lack of personal jurisdiction, it sounds kind of like a double negative. It means that there was personal jurisdiction over Valveco. So we'll figure that out. Valveco then filed the notice to remove the case. Patient wants to remand. So since we're going over the first two questions here, we're going to kind of not care about that too much. And then relying solely on the judgment, patient then filed a motion into summary adjudication. So that's about like issue preclusion, claim preclusion. Again, I think that goes to question 4 here, so we're not going to care about it that much. And anything here? Yeah, so Valveco was incorporated in state C, meaning, so there's a special different rule for corporations. It may go to the question of domicile, so let's check our magic sheets. Corporation's domicile. So the corporation is domiciled where it is its state of incorporation, and or where it's the state of the principal place of business. So in this case, Valveco was incorporated in state C, so it is V's domicile. V is also headquartered there, so if we use the nerve center test, decisions are made as headquarters. In that case, V's domicile is also state D. So let's put that down here. Okay, so now we have a pretty clear breakdown of what happened, who's doing what, and let's tackle personal jurisdiction. And this one, I think it is one of the most straightforward issues that you can encounter on the bar exam. So if I saw this, I would not cheer out loud, but in my head, because there are a lot of sub-issues, but those sub-issues are also very straightforward. So you just kind of take it step by step, break it down into sub-issues, and you should be good to go. All right, so let's do the first one, doctor. So personal jurisdiction, there are 3 prongs. We have traditional basis, we have statutory basis, and then we have the constitutional basis. So let's just put that down for now. Traditional bases, statutory basis, constitutional basis. And typically the first 2 bases here, they're typically slam dunk questions or issues. So we will typically resolve these pretty quickly because the examiners want to see how well you can break down this chunky issue, the constitutional basis, the international issue test. You don't even have to know what the name of the case is. National issue, domestic issue, it doesn't matter. Outer national issue, whatever. We just need to know what the sub-issues are under that test. For now, we'll go over the traditional basis. So this also has subparts. I remember using the acronym CDP, and I don't even know what they stand for. Consent, domicile, whatever P is. I think it's presence. All I know is CDP, and you can use a mnemonic to remember this. CDP, so that's like car dealership, pissing contest, doesn't matter. The more provocative it is, the easier it is to remember it. So you can think about all the car dealerships trying to sell you their car. They're calling you, they're leaving you voice messages, they're sending you videos. So remember that, and you'll remember CDP. Consent, domicile, and then let's just double check P here. presence, okay? And do these mean anything? Yeah, consent is stuff like you got called into court, you make an appearance. Domicile for a person, that's like where you live, like permanently. Presence is you're there, I guess. So, okay, so doctor, do we have consent? Well, doctor just lives in state A. So that's kind of doctor's domicile. Doctor has never seemingly visited state B. Doctor was sort of held into court because he got sued, but it doesn't seem like a very strong amount of consent. He's still not there. So I think we want to say probably not, and kind of move on to the next one, which is statutory basis. Statutory basis, another slam dunk here. Let's pull this up here. I'm just going to write this down just to be clear. No personal jurisdiction over the doctor based on traditional basis. In statutory basis, this is typically assumed to exist within each state. So that's just like a quick rule about, there's a long-arm statute. And then because of that long-arm statute, we have statutory basis. And then the constitutional basis is sort of the expansion to that statutory basis. So we can just copy this down if we wanted to. A state's long-arm statute gives jurisdiction over non-residents to constitutionally permissible extent. So constitutionally permissible. So we'll have to expand it out into this constitutional basis. And we assume that whatever state, A, B, C, D, they all have one. So whatever, that's we're going to assume yes. And then move on to the constitutional basis, which is where the real meat of this question is, or just call it the question. And then constitutional basis, of course, governed by the international issue test. There are multiple things to look at, but again, it's pretty straightforward. If you know what happened in the fact pattern, you can probably break it down and then go through it pretty quickly. So what is required for a constitutional basis to have personal jurisdiction over a defendant? Well, according to international issue, we need minimum contacts. I can actually pull this up here. Minimum contacts between defendant and the forum state. That also has a couple of elements. We need relatedness of the plaintiff's claim to the defendant's contacts with the forum. And then lastly, we need some fairness factor. We got to look at whether it's fair to have personal power over the defendant, the doctor in this case. So we'll write this down. Minimum contacts, relatedness, fairness factors. And then below these we have purposeful availment, reasonable foreseeability. And then under relatedness, okay, let's put these tabbed out so that we know these are sub-issues under constitutional basis. Relatedness, we can look at two different types of jurisdictions, specific and general. These are sub-issues. And fairness factors, we have 3 different factors that we can look at. And we can go through it as we look into the facts here. And these are all sub-issues that you want to highlight. So typically you want to maybe just underline or bold or italicize. We want the grader to know that we see the issues, punch them in the face so they know that you saw the issues. If they see that, they're going to like you. They're going to know that you know how to break this down. So we are already seeing the skeleton of this call of the question. We have 3 different bases. We knocked out traditional bases. We knocked out statutory bases, which led into the constitutional basis, which breaks down into these elements under international issue. And then we'll go over these. Minimum contacts between the defendant and the forum state. That needs purposeful availment to the forum state and reasonable foreseeability of being held into the forum state court. For example, the defendant was working there, receiving compensation. So doctor, we already know that the doctor lives in state A. He practices in state A. He has no relations to state B. He doesn't seem like he's been to state B. He doesn't have an office there. So I don't think there was any purposeful availment here to the forum state, which is state B. To state B. So we're going to say no. Was there a reasonable foreseeability of being hailed into state B? No. The doctor has, again, he doesn't practice in state B. He doesn't, I mean, he used a valve that was designed here, but does the doctor know that? Did he know that the valve was somehow defectively designed? It was probably not even, he probably didn't even know that it was defectively designed. So I also want to say no here. There was no reasonable foreseeability that the doctor would be hailed into state B's court. So no, again. So we probably do not have minimum contacts. Relatedness, let's look at that. So specific jurisdiction arises when the cause of action is related to the defendant's contacts. So we don't even have defendant's contacts in state B. But was there, so the cause of action here is, let's see, what did doctor allegedly do? Negligently implanted it. This happened in state A. The doctor implanted the valve in the patient in state A. So even if the doctor had contacts with state B, the cause of action happened in state A. So there's no relation between those two things. So once again, this is a no. General jurisdiction can arise even if the cause of action is not related, which is in this case. So did the doctor have continuous and systematic contact with state B such that the defendant would be essentially at home in state B? No. Again, the doctor has no contact with state B. He lives in state A, he or she. So there's no relatedness here either. Lastly, let's look at the fairness factors. So we want to balance the interests of the plaintiff, the forum state, and the defendant. The interest of the patient getting relief, that's important. Like if the defendant was actually, or if the plaintiff was actually injured, then yes, we want to compensate for that. And the state B is probably interested in providing that redress. The defendant, is the doctor going to be gravely inconvenienced if he or she has to go to state B? Probably not. It might be like 6 hours away if they're like on opposite sides of the country. We're assuming the U.S. here, but I don't think it's going to be like a huge. We're not doing like international travel here, so the fairness factors kind of point to it will be kind of fair to have personal jurisdiction over the defendant. However, these other two elements, we don't really meet those. Actually, it's pretty clear that we don't meet those. There's no minimum contacts. There's no relatedness. So the fairness factor, even though it would be fair to bring him in, there's really no basis to have the doctor in state B. So we're going to conclude here. On balance, it doesn't make sense that there would be personal jurisdiction. So the question was there personal jurisdiction over the defendant? No. So let's write down, there's no, I'm just going to write this quickly. There's no personal jurisdiction over D, meaning the court was correct in granting the doctor's motion to dismiss the case on the ground of lack of personal jurisdiction. So the court was correct, yes. So the ultimate conclusion is, the answer to this question actually is the state court properly granted doctor's motion to dismiss. Okay, so even though there are multiple sub-elements and sub-sub-elements, once you break it down into this issue skeleton, it doesn't seem as daunting. So that's one of the big points that I wanted to make here. So as long as you know how to break it down into these step-by-step elements, and if you know the facts and you know how to apply the facts, it's pretty straightforward. And you can, hopefully this shows you that if you practice this a few times, it's just going to be busy work for you. It's going to get to the point that it's boring, because it's so just mechanical that you're just going to fly through it. So let us fly through the same analysis, but for Valveco. So we'll copy the 3 bases here. So once again, CDP, car dealerships piston contest. Consent, domicile, presence. We already know that there is some domicile in state B. Valveco designed the valve here. And so we can kind of say that, Valveco designed the valve in state B, meaning there was some level of presence, at least the presence. Domicile, no, I don't think we have domicile because V's domicile is in state C and in state D. Consent, by designing the valve in state B, it sort of invites, lawsuits and contacts and so on. So I think we can say that at least because of presence by virtue of designing the valve in 8B, there is a basis for having personal jurisdiction over Valveco in state B. Okay, so off to a good start. However, we're not going to stop here. We want to show the grader that even though we can technically stop the analysis here, let's just cover all bases, no pun intended. Let's go over the statutory basis, and then which leads into the constitutional basis. So once again, same answer here. We're going to assume that there is statutory basis. And then let's break this down again. We can actually just literally copy and paste. Clear these answers. Okay, so the minimum contacts, was there purposeful availment to state B? Yeah, the Valveco designed the valve in state B, so there was availment to state B. Let's just double check the rule. Purposeful availment to the forum state, which is state B. Reasonable foreseeability of being hailed into the forum state court, state B. Working, receiving compensation. So it's a little bit different for a company. It's not really working or receiving compensation. However, just by being in state B and doing some operations here, Valveco was designing the valve here. So I think there was some level of foreseeability on Valveco's part that it was going to be, hailed into state B court because maybe the valve failed or there was some defect. So I think we can reasonably conclude that there was some reasonable foreseeability. So there was some level of minimum context here. We're going to put yes for Valveco. Relatedness. Let's look at specific and general jurisdiction again. The cause of action, which is, let's see, patient sued Valveco for defectively designing the valve. Okay. Is that related to Valveco's contacts in state B? I think there is a very tight relation between those two things. Valveco designed the valve in state B, and Valveco is being sued in state B for designing the valve. So I think there was specific jurisdiction. And by the way, this is all like outlining. We're going to think in our head. On a real exam, you might want to maybe jot down quick rules or maybe some facts. But at least by having these issues and kind of thinking through the process, once you get this down, the rest of it is going to be busy where you're just going to be typing it out, whatever you outlined here. So this is just the outlining process. And obviously, it's not going to take like 20 minutes because I'm talking and explaining. It does seem like it's going to take longer, but in your head, this whole process should take maybe like 1 or 2 minutes max. And then this whole outline from question 1 to question 4, 10 minutes, 15 if you're late, 7 if you're quick. So this is just setting up the shape of the issue. And once you figure this out, you are halfway home free. Let's look at general jurisdiction. Was there continuous and systematic contact with state B? Was Valveco essentially at home? Was there domicile state incorporation? No, I don't think so. Not really. It just kind of had like designing operations in state B. The real domicile, the real essentially at home-ness, or the continuous and systematic contact, it's more by states C and D. So you can talk about that there, here, and, if you're writing it out, and then ultimately conclude that probably not. There's no general jurisdiction in state B. But ultimately, we are seeing that there is relatedness of the patient's claim to the context of valve code with state B. So far we have minimum context and relatedness. So now, would it be fair to have this trial in state B? Again, we want the patient to get relief. The forum state is probably interested in providing that redress. And the valve code is not going to be gravely inconvenienced at all because it already does designing activities in state B, assuming it's continuing to do that. It's done it in state B once, so even if it stopped operating in state B, it's going to be not a grave inconvenience because it's been in state B already, in the past at least. So according to these factors, there's nothing really stopping personal jurisdiction applying to valve code. So the factors on balance do not gravely inconvenience V, and then you can talk about these interests. And in conclusion, there is personal jurisdiction over B. Let's kind of soften it a little bit. There can be, or there's likely, personal jurisdiction, or a basis for personal jurisdiction over VALVCO. And did the state court properly deny VALVCO's motion to dismiss? Let's see. VALVCO moved to dismiss the case on the ground of lack of personal jurisdiction. The state court disagreed with that basis. So in this case, the court was also, yes, properly denying VALVCO's motion to dismiss the case based on lack of PJ. So let's say state B court properly denied VALVCO's motion to dismiss. I keep misspelling this word. So we did the exact same analysis, but we came to different conclusions because this is why it's important to break this down. Who was in state B? What was happening in state B? And for the first question, the doctor it had nothing to do with state B. It was the patient just visiting here where the valve was designed. And so because of those facts, because the facts were different, the analysis was different, conclusion was different. It's really uncomplicated. I wore this shirt just to show you that it's not complicated once you figure it out. So hopefully you feel the same way. So the main point I want to make here is to really focus on the issues. You got to know the issues. When people say know the law, that doesn't mean the rule only. You have to know the issues. What are the nuances? What are the sub-issues? What are the sub-elements? Because once you know the shape of the essay, you know how to solve it. If you don't know the shape of the essay, if you don't know the issues, knowing the rules is not going to help you. You can know the rules and not know the issues. You're not going to know where to put the rules. You have to, once you set this up, you know where to put the rules. If you cannot identify the issues, then you don't know where to put the rules. So, don't over-fixate on memorizing the rules. You also have to memorize the issues. You also have to know how the issues and the rules play out in examples like this. This is why it's so important to actually go through past exam questions. See how, the first time you see this, you are probably going to mess up. And that is perfectly acceptable. In fact, you should get things wrong because then okay, so this is where I missed it. Maybe you didn't know, there was a minimum context element to this. Once you see that there is, now the next time you are going to know, okay, so I'm going to bring up minimum context. So this continuous loop of just looking at the fact patterns over and over again, looking at fact patterns, figuring out the issue patterns. This pattern is going to be the same for every personal jurisdiction question. Once you see that, it's just going to become more intuitive, and you are just going to be able to connect the dots a lot faster. And on the real exam, you see this, you've done it before, it's just going to be a walk in the park. So I will leave the last two issues as an exercise for you if you want to continue. Again, this is California, July 2015, essay number 1. If you are taking the UBE, I'm sure there are more Civ Pro questions that you can pull up. On my website, there are downloadable links to that. So the key is not like what kind of outlines you have, what kind of courses you have, what kind of materials you have. It's about using whatever you have on hand to go through these past exam questions. The past is going to guide your future. You just gotta look at these patterns come up over and over again, so that when you're sitting on the exam hot seat, you've seen it before, you're gonna know what to do. So hopefully this was helpful. It looks daunting at first, but once you break it down into an issue skeleton, it just becomes so much more approachable. If you want to see another issue broken down like this, please let me know, and I will do my best to break it down for you. Cheers.